Welcome to Sixth Row Center, your best seat in the house for movie chat. I'm Heath, and this is the final episode of my three-part series where I'm telling you all about the movies that I saw in 2025. There were over 150 of them, if you can believe it. Part 1 was the lesser movies, Part 2 was the better movies, and this will be my top 15. There'll be 5 honorable mentions, and then I'll be counting down from 10 to 1. In the first 2, I only gave you a thought or two about each film, but for these I'll spend a little bit more time. Also, previously, instead of counting down, I grouped the movies, and I'll give you a quick recap of those groups. The first were the awful films, with no redeeming qualities. The next were the just plain bad ones. Third came the movies that weren't bad at all, but they weren't necessarily good either. They were truly so-so flicks. After that were the movies that were slightly better than so-so. I'd call them decent. The fifth group were actually good. The sixth group was better than good. And that brings us to today's first category. These films were great. And they should be, as they're the best ones of the year. We're going to start with my honorable mentions in no particular order, beginning with Song Sung Blue, the docudrama about the Neil Diamond cover band Lightning and Thunder, starring Hugh Jackman and Kate Hudson, who, by the way, very impressively did all of their own singing in this movie. This is a total feel-good story with high highs and low lows of this loving couple and their combined family of kids from previous marriages. And trust me, you want to spend every minute with these guys. The music is awesome, it tugs at the heartstrings, it keeps you invested from start to finish. My next honorable mention is The Long Walk. Now, this was based on a Stephen King book that I loved so much that I wrote my own script for it about 20 years ago, maybe even longer than that. And it came out way better than this one. There were so many problems I had with this movie, from the characters to the situations to so many things I thought were completely unrealistic. And yet, somehow, as these boys were walking, I was completely riveted to the screen. I pretty much hated the portrayal of every character because of the fact that they were so totally different than the book. And yet, somehow, it works in the film. I could spend weeks ripping this movie to shreds, but I still loved watching it. I can't explain it, but there it is. My next honorable mention is Begonia. Jesse Plemons and Emma Stone matching wits for nearly 2 hours. I've always loved the weirdly off-kilter worlds that Yorgos Lanthimos creates, from Dogtooth to The Lobster, Killing of a Sacred Deer. I especially liked Poor Things. Begonia was based on a novel by Korean writer Jang Joon Hwan. And while I found the twist at the end to be somewhat obvious, I really enjoyed Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons' performances so much that I thought it made up for it. My next honorable mention is Blue Moon. This was based on a true story about Lawrence Hart, who along with Richard Rodgers formed one of the greatest songwriting duos ever in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, Rodgers and Hart. The story opens after the two have parted ways, and Rodgers has teamed up with Oscar Hammerstein to write the hugely successful Broadway musical Oklahoma, which would be the first of many great musicals by the two of them. The entire story takes place at the bar where the after-party of the opening night of Oklahoma is. Ethan Hawke plays Lorenz Hart as he navigates the room, discussing his life and hopefulness of a comeback with anyone who will listen, including Margaret Qualley as a college student that he's infatuated with, and Bobby Cannavale as the bartender, and always brilliant Andrew Scott as his ex-partner Richard Rodgers. Richard Linklater's dialogue is just as Oscar-worthy as Hawke's performance of it, and they really make this movie work. I mean, I can't say enough about Ethan Hawke in this. It is a career-defining performance. And just as great is the way that Linklater's camera follows him as he traverses the bar over and over. There was so much that was great about Blue Moon. And my last honorable mention is the Australian horror film Bring Her Back. Now, this one was wild. One of these movies where you watch it and you're thinking, what in the ever-loving hell is going on? And unlike most movies, when you finally find out, it is not a letdown. Sally Hawkins is just great as a foster mother who takes in orphans, Billy Barrett, and newcomer Sarah Wong, who I read had no acting experience at all and auditioned because her mother saw an ad for a casting call on Facebook. Bring Her Back was co-written and co-directed by twin brothers Danny and Michael Philippou, whose 2022 debut, Talk to Me, was also a really good horror flick. I would totally recommend that one. These guys have come up with some very unusual stories, and they really know how to load on the creepiness. Okay, enough of the honorable mentions. Now it gets to the countdown, the 10 best movies of 2025, starting with number 10, Christy. I know this movie about the professional female boxer Christy Martin got a lot of flack because people didn't want Sydney Sweeney playing the role. But I thought she was excellent and totally believable in the part. But it was the performance of Merritt Wever as her horrible mother, but especially Ben Foster as her abusive husband that stole the show. I don't think I've ever seen a character portrayed with such dorkish and pitiful menace before. You wouldn't think those particular traits could mix, but Foster pulls it off. He is truly a terrifying bad guy, and yet he just seems so pitiful all the time. And then the story, it's nothing more than an average sports plot, sure, until you see some of the things that Christie endures. I had to actually read some bios on her just to see how truthful the movie was, and unbelievably, it was all true. I just remember thinking when the credits began rolling at the end of this movie, damn, that was a surprisingly good movie. Number 9, the movie called I Swear. This is another true story. This one's about John Davidson, not the actor from the old TV show That's Incredible with Fran Tarkenton and Kathy Lee Crosby. Does anybody remember that? Am I the only person who remembers That's Incredible? Anyway, this John Davidson is a Scottish guy who suffers from Tourette's syndrome, played magnificently by Scott Ellis Watson briefly when he's the younger Davidson, and then Robert Aramayo as the adult. I don't want to give too much away, but all I can say is, as I was watching the horrible things that this poor guy goes through, I was in tears through most of the runtime. Eventually, through personal triumph and the help of great friends, especially Peter Mullen and a wonderful Maxine Peake, who I mentioned in the previous episode, she did a movie called Words of War. Through the two of them and other friends, John Davidson finally sees a little light at the end of the tunnel. This one is kind of a tough watch due to the subject matter, but it is such a rewarding watch. Number 8 is Black Bag, a fiendishly clever spy thriller written by David Cope, whose resume is long and prestigious, including other turns in the same genre, like the first Mission Impossible movie and Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit. Black Bag is directed with aplomb by the equally great Steven Soderbergh. It stars Michael Fassbender as a British counterintelligence officer given 1 week to investigate the leak of a top-secret software program. Among the suspects is his wife, who is also an intelligence officer, played by Cate Blanchett. The sordid group of spy/friends are all fun to watch, and Soderbergh is a master at showing exactly what needs to be seen, when it needs to be seen, in the framing of every shot, and Cope's dialogue allows the actors to really shine. In fact, while there was definitely action in this espionage caper, much of the suspense comes from the witty and deceitful conversation. A huge plus is the fact that when the end finally rolled around, I had no idea who the bad guy was, nor how he or she may or may not be foiled. Okay, so those were the first 3 movies, numbers 10, 9, and 8. They were great movies, but I think they take a little bit of a jump in the next group because these are the better than great movies, the best of the best. These are the sorts of movies that should be winning the majority of awards every year. And we're going to begin with number 7, which is Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another, based on the Thomas Pynchon novel. This was such an enjoyable movie, and yet some people are putting it up there in the masterpiece category. Okay, let's not go crazy, folks. This isn't even in my top 3 P.T. Anderson movies. That being said, it's really great. I'm going to say it right now. Leonardo DiCaprio is one of the best actors of this generation. And what I really love about him is that the roles he takes are so diverse. And he's so believable in all of them. This one, a burnout, pot-smoking former revolutionary turned paranoid single father, is probably not something that most people can relate to. And he totally nails it. I thought this film was hilarious because it makes fun of everybody. It makes fun of both political sides. The left as domestic terrorists, okay, but then afterwards they kind of get older and they turn into stoners and old yuppies, And then the younger ones are all like Karens who are triggered like snowflakes if you don't give the proper series of dumb passwords or use the wrong pronoun. And then there's the right wingers, led by the spectacular Sean Penn, who should definitely take the Best Supporting Actor Oscar as this psycho military racist who wants nothing more than to join the elite racist club, the Christmas Adventurers Club. I mean, if you don't see the humor in that, either you're blind or maybe you're a partisan yourself. However, even beyond that, the story of Daddy DiCaprio trying to save his daughter, who may or may not even be his daughter, from demented Sean Penn is worth the price of admission, and then some. This is one I'm already ready to see again, because I know that with all P.T. Anderson movies, there's going to be lots of nuances that I'll see in a second viewing that I would have missed in the first one. One Battle After Another is number 7. Number 6 is Hamnet, which should give us our Best Actress Oscar for Jessie Buckley's Anya's Shakespeare. And I think the only guy who can give Ethan Hawke a run for his money for Best Actor is Paul Mescal. Or, you know something? They're putting Paul Mescal in the Best Supporting Actor category. Okay, maybe he takes the Best Supporting Actor. Why was this movie not better than One Battle After Another? Well, one, as much as I enjoyed One Battle After Another, it was really, really long, and it felt it at times. That helped Hamnet, because it's actually kind of slow in places, especially at the beginning. And that's not to say that it's not good. It's just slow-paced. However, throughout the movie, there were about 4 or 5 scenes that were so emotionally charged, they really made this movie. I don't think I'm giving anything away when I tell you that at one point, the characters in the film perform the play Hamlet. I'm sure everybody knows the story of Hamlet. You know, at the end, Hamlet dies. He's poisoned by the blade of his former friend Laertes at the behest of his uncle who murdered his father and became the king. Now, I don't know how many times I've seen the play Hamlet performed. I've seen it live. I've seen movie versions of it. I've seen at least 4 different movie versions of it. And I've seen some of those multiple times. And I've read the play at least once or twice. And in all those times, I can't recall when watching Hamlet die at the end, ever breaking down into tears at all, let alone sobbing uncontrollably like I did when I was watching this movie. Maybe I'm just a crybaby and it won't have the same effect on you. Although if it doesn't, most likely it's because you're a cold-hearted bastard. And that is why Hamnet is at number 6. Hey, we're halfway through the top 10, and number 5 comes up next. It is 28 years later, the 3rd installment of Danny Boyle's zombie franchise. The reason that 28 days later, the first one, was so excellent, and 28 weeks later sucked so much, beside the fact that the first one was written by Alex Garland and directed by Danny Boyle, and the second one was not, is that the story for 28 Days Later, while yes, it was about a zombie apocalypse, it wasn't about just running away from zombies. It was very character-driven. In fact, you could have had the same story, just as good, without zombies at all. So a small military unit cut off possibly forever, realizing that they're all going to die out if they don't add some women to their only male group, tries to abduct some females. I mean, no zombies necessary. Now, when you put that in the middle of not just a zombie infestation, but the new breed of zombies that Garland created, it just made for an amazing watch. The second film, made by hacks, just went back to the old boring, you got some heroes, they're trapped by zombies, they have to survive, there's nothing more, and it was a really bad movie. Now we have a human story again, with the 13-year-old newcomer Alfie Williams helping transport his sickly mother, played by an always excellent Jodie Comer, across the wilderness to hopefully find the last real doctor in all of England, who, by the way, is Ralph Fiennes. I mentioned before about DiCaprio, who's one of the best actors of this generation. Well, Ralph Fiennes is one of the best actors ever. I really cared about Fiennes, about Williams, Comer, and Comer's husband, who plays Williams' father, Aaron Taylor Johnson. Just like in the first film, when the human story is coupled with a new form of zombies, this story also paired with a few new wrinkles that make the stakes even higher. It was so good that I can't wait to see the sequel, which, as of this recording, I believe came out just about a week ago in theaters. Number 4, Zach Cregger's Weapons. I love me some Zach Cregger's, all the way back to his ridiculous comedy show, The Whitest Kids You Know, as well as his first film, Barbarian. This one is the best example of the year of the movie that presents a mystery and leaves the audience thinking, what in the hell is going on here? And then, when it finally explains things, you're just simply blown away. I've seen interviews with Gregor who says that when he writes, it's all about subverting expectation, and he totally accomplishes that over and over again in Weapons. Just when you think the story might be going in any particular direction, it throws you a curve. I'm not a huge Juliet Garner fan, but I really liked her alcoholic elementary school teacher who's just as lost and clueless as the audience is. All the actors were great. Josh Brolin as the obsessive grieving parent, Alden Ehrenreich as the overly violent cop, and Kerry Christopher especially as the little boy who knows a little bit more than he's letting on. But really, it's Amy Madigan, who doesn't show up until halfway through, but then she totally steals the show. She is my vote for Best Supporting Actress. This one reminded me of like a Brothers Grimm fairy tale, only the real ones, the old ones, before they were Disneyfied, because they're not just dark and scary, but they also don't necessarily have happy endings. However, happy or not, I found the end of Weapons to be quite satisfying. And that's why Weapons is at number 4. And now, number 3, we have Wake Up Dead Man, the third installment of Rian Johnson's Knives Out series. Hey, say what you want about Rian Johnson screwing up his take on Star Wars. I really didn't care, honestly, because there hasn't been a good Star Wars movie since The Empire Strikes Back. If it's one thing Johnson can get right, it's crafting a great murder mystery. From his debut movie Brick, which currently resides in my top 150 all-time movies, to the first 2 Knives Out films, Rian Johnson is becoming a modern-day Agatha Christie. And I say that because the old-time writers like Agatha Christie knew the power of creating your great detective. She, of course, invented Hercule Poirot and Miss Marples, among others. There were other writers, though, at the same time. They made detectives like Sherlock Holmes, and the pulp novels of the 30s and 40s gave us Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade. Even young adult stuff had Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. Who do we have now as your, great modern detective that's like in a series? There's no one until Rian Johnson gave us Benoit Blanc. He is truly a character worthy of that list. But not only that, Johnson puts together some great stories. OK, Glass Onion got a little silly and contrived. But the rest, Wake Up Dead Man, has everything you could desire in a true locked door murder mystery setting. Josh O'Connor, who seems to be everywhere nowadays, and deservedly so, because he's really good, plays a young priest caught up in the middle of this one, and Daniel Craig's Blanc is tasked with proving his innocence by finding the killer. Like all the Knives Out films, the ensemble cast is top-notch. Glenn Close, Josh Brolin again, Mila Kunis, Jeremy Renner, Kerry Washington, Andrew Scott again, Thomas Hayden Church, and Jeffrey Wright, among others, are all a joy to watch. And I will say that while I totally guessed who the killer was, I did. I guessed who the killer was. I had no idea how it was done or why. So, yeah, it was just a guess. I didn't know anything. I just said, oh, maybe it's this person, and it turned out it was. Wake Up Dead Man is at number 3. And number 2 is Caught Stealing from director Darren Aronofsky, a director I particularly like. I especially like it when it's his own source material, but this one was not written by Aronofsky. It was written by Charlie Huston, based on Huston's novel of the same name. Now, I've read a few Charlie Huston books, like The Shotgun Rule and The Mystic Art of Erasing All Signs of Death, and I really liked them. Caught Stealing is the first of a series featuring the baseball-crazy anti-hero Henry Thompson as he struggles to escape his past and build a new life for himself. I love these sorts of stories where like a mostly regular guy gets thrown into the criminal underworld and has to survive and extricate himself using only his own wits. And this one is a mile-a-minute action-packed joyride with a tremendous cast of oddball characters, from former Doctor Who Matt Smith donning a mohawk, to the incredibly versatile Regina King as a menacing baddie, to Liv Schreiber and Vincent D'Onofrio as psychic Hasidic Jews, and Carol Kane as their matzo ball soup-making mother. I don't normally care for Austin Butler, but if he makes more of these movies, I'll be the first in line to see them. This movie was like Pulp Fiction meets Snatch meets The Nice Guys. High praise indeed. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the number 1 movie of 2025. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it is not what you're going to be expecting. Because The number one movie of 2025 is The Ballad of Wallace Island. I totally adored this film. This British comedy drama, written by its stars, Tim Key and Tom Basden, has more heart in it than it knows what to do with. Without giving away too much, it's about this folk music duo, Maguire and Mortimer, played by Basden and Carey Mulligan. I always love Carey Mulligan, who weren't just musical partners, but they were also romantically linked before their breakup many years ago. And Charles Heath. It's a pretty great name, Charles Heath. He's an eccentric millionaire superfan of Maguire and Mortimer, who pays them both a ton of money to reunite for a single concert on his own private island. I know it doesn't sound like much, but the dynamic between these three characters, who are also painfully real, is at the heart of this incredibly touching story. Everyone gets on everyone else's nerves as you learn more and more about their backgrounds and their needs and their emotional traumas. Tim Key, the eccentric millionaire, does do this kind of shtick, and if you don't like it, it might take away from your enjoyment. I remember when the movie began, I was thinking, gee, I hope this guy doesn't act like that all the way through the entire movie, and yet, by the end, it was so endearing that he was my favorite character. I honestly can't say enough about this movie. It mines so much that's sweet and sentimental and warm from its simplistic premise about the memories that we attach to our favorite songs in the past and how they can remain so meaningful as we navigate our lives. If there isn't a tear in your eye by the end of this one, once again, I'm going to call you a heartless bastard. And that's it. That's my... No, wait! I'm going to do one more. A bonus. You get a bonus. Aren't you lucky? And that's because the best movie that I saw in 2025 hasn't actually been released yet. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival, I believe, and I was able to get a copy, but it hasn't been released to the public or in theaters yet. And I would like to mention that as I've been putting movies in groups, I've gone through 7 different groups already, from the really, really crappy ones to the really, really great ones. But there are actually 4 more ranking categories, which start at the elite and go all the way up to the greatest movies ever. Unfortunately, no movies from 2025 rank that high, except for this movie that I'm going to tell you about right now. It just made it into the elite category. And this is called In the Hand of Dante, directed by painter and filmmaker Julian Schnabel, written by Schnabel and Louise Kugelberg. It's based on the Nick Tosh's Charlie Kaufman-like novel of the same name, In the Hand of Dante. And I say Charlie Kaufman-like because, similar to another one of my all-time favorites, Charlie Kaufman's adaptation, which, as an aside, I was an extra in. You can see me in that movie. Tosh's writes himself as a character into his own story. Now, In the Hand of Dante is a grand, epic achievement with dual storylines. The first concerns the writer, Dante Alighieri, in the 1300s. Dante, of course, is known for writing the Divine Comedy, the first part, or cantica, of which is famously known as Dante's Inferno. This book caused him great strife at the time and even got him exiled from his home city. The second storyline is set in 2001 in New York, where Mafia Don John Malkovich has discovered a possible handwritten copy of the Divine Comedy in the actual hand of Dante, hence the name, and he decides to go through devious means to acquire it for himself. This story has so much going on, even aside from the different goals of different characters concerning the book itself. There's a timeless, tragic love story, there's deceit and murder and revenge and honor. It's almost like The Princess Bride, and it all comes together into a neat, satisfying conclusion. Oscar Isaac stars as Dante in the 1300s storyline, and as the writer Nick Tosh's in the more current one, who also happens to be one of the very few people capable of determining if the manuscript is genuine. The sometimes wooden Gal Gadot is surprisingly good as Dante's long-suffering wife, and the best is Gerard Butler. He plays the Pope in the 1300s, as well as a psychotic New York mafia hitman in the current storyline. There are also great cameos. Al Pacino, Martin Scorsese, Jason Momoa is really good. Whenever this one gets released, do yourself a favor, go check it out. Well, Now I really am at the end. You got the 5 honorable mentions, you got my top 10, and a bonus. What did you think? Did you love my list? Did you hate it? Have you never even heard of most of these movies? Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you want, write down your top 10 of 2025. That's going to do it for me now from the Sixth Row Center, and I got a bolt because there's a movie right about to start.